While Elon Musk has expressed his doubts about the power of Lidar to help automakers achieve full self-driving, Luminar CEO Austin Russell is all in on the technology. In this episode, we explore all things economy, growth, markets, and we dive into the opportunity in China for next-generation connected and autonomous vehicles. Austin Russell is back, unfiltered, and this is a can't-miss show. All right, here we go. You're tuned in to Making Markets.
This is the Making Markets podcast, brought to you by Futurum Research. We bring you top executives from the world's most exciting technology companies, bridging the gap between strategy, markets, innovation, and the companies featured on the show. The Making Markets podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take anything reflected in this show as investment advice. Now, your host, Principal Analyst and founding partner of Futurum Research, Daniel Newman.
Austin Russell, CEO Luminar, welcome back to Making Markets.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you back. I always love when people come back, multiple conversations, get to know you better, a couple of sessions at our 6.5 Summit now, and a couple of times here on the show, and a couple of random run-ins at F1 events. You know, earlier before the show, you were wearing the F1 jacket, the Aston Martin jacket, which probably isn't the one that most people see on an everyday on a guy, but it looked good on you.
There we go. Yeah, they did. There you go. They did give this one to me. So I think to your credit, it's one of the coolest jackets I've seen, even though that I have.
I mean, they make some great vehicles.
But
they make some great vehicles, and I wouldn't mind getting behind the wheel of a few of them. So
now the Mercedes stuff though is always cool though too. You know, that's an interesting one because we're obviously working closely with Mercedes on the car side there too for the next generation of production vehicles, and but it's interesting to see that whole world crossover. But of course, yeah.
You wonder if someday, the technology that we're going to see Lewis Hamilton with a little Luminar on his helmet. Then, something.
We do have actually the Indy folks adopted our tech as well for their racing series. They have the Indy Autonomous Challenge, which is it's pretty cool. So that's all autonomous and powered by that. I think I do actually think, for what it's worth, not that this is a primary focus or market for that matter, but it is interesting from a it's basically free marketing, when you go out there and equip this tech on things of something that people normally spend a lot for to just be able to actually get the word out and start showing the capabilities of what's possible from an extreme performance standpoint, which translates of course into consumer vehicles as well, and that's why so many automakers bet so big on these kinds of things.
Yeah, you can do some sort of Lidar fencing at the first, 30 seconds of these races where there's inevitably always like 2 or 3 cars that crash in that initial bunching.
Yeah, exactly.
Really good for, maybe we could keep all the cars in the race a little bit longer if we put a little Lidar into their world. But I don't want to totally geek out on F1. So much going on right now in the world. Have had some great guests on the show over the past few weeks. I had Tom Siebel join me. I had Bill McDermott on the show from ServiceNow, and I'm talking to different CEOs, including yourself, kind of a little bit different from the initial format where I talked a little bit more about earnings and business progress. We will talk about that at the end a little bit, although you're in quiet period or near your period, so more just business progress in general, Austin. But with what I would say a 6 or 7 month sort of headwind now for growth. Really no data in the economy that people should feel particularly great about right now. But at the same time, we got to keep churning on. So, interested in getting the sort of sentiment of people like yourself that are building growth companies that are going to be critical to the future, technology that's going to not only make better vehicles and save lives. What are you thinking about every day right now with all the news, recession, interest, inflation, war, increased unemployment, hiring freezes? Kind of what's the Luminar Austin Russell take on everything that's happening?
Yeah, no, it's good. So I have a lot of takes on all of those different things. I think the most important take is the one as it relates to us and our business and everything, in which case it affects almost absolutely nothing. And I it's kind of crazy to say that, or almost crazy to hear that, in terms of this, but we're executing the same plan, same progress, same other things. There's a lot of craziness out in the market with a bunch of different things that have been converging that have obviously caused a significant headwinds from like a stock market perspective in particular, or equities market, for growth companies there too, that often end up getting bundled into this, this category that I think is exacerbated by a couple of different fronts. Yeah, there's all these things, between all those factors that you're mentioning that are kind of external, but I think what ends up happening is that most of the companies end up getting bundled into the same kind of category. Like, okay, it's like growth company, mostly tech focused, technology driven and technology forward. That's not, of course, not profitable at this stage, but at least with some revenue, more than pretty much every other autonomous vehicle company, so to say, which is zero or near zero, since we're actually starting to realize some of these things, and that's what's coming up. But the reality is that we are continuing to execute like no tomorrow along to the plan. We haven't had any kind of dramatic shifts or changes or anything like that, and are just continuing to double down on everything that we have ahead of ourselves. And that's something that I think from a market standpoint, all logic has just, completely gone out the window, along with a few other things, unfortunately, between separating out the great companies from the questionable companies that maybe shouldn't have existed in the first place. And as we know, that there was a period of time where it seemed like almost any company could go out there with just an idea and a slide deck and a plan and be able to raise a lot of money for something to be valued at something either artificially high or not. And that this is where the tides have turned, winds have changed. The music stopped on that, as we all knew that it would in one way or another. But the key thing is that at the end of the day, you need to have the cash, you need to have the capital to be able to ensure that you can have successful execution. The only thing where it can trip you up is if you need to be able to have additional capital and raise capital, which unfortunately is actually the case for most of these types of companies. We actually have a really, really strong position here. We had at the end of the prior quarter, nearly $750 million on our balance sheet here. And it's something that we are in an incredibly strong position, more than ever, to be able to successfully execute that and utilize that capital. We're actually unlike most other AV companies, stuff, we're not like spending or on a net basis like a billion or 2 billion a year on anything. It's closer to, just as like last year as a reference point, it was about 150 million. So we have plenty of runway as part of this. But importantly is that we actually have real business here from all of these major wins, which are kind of the first of its kind in the industry there too. We have now nearly a dozen different major commercial wins that we've put forth with real OEMs and real companies there too, that are actually going into series production for the first time in the industry, and for these levels of capability. And that's what we're going to be seeing not too far right around the corner here with some of the key partners. And that's where you have real revenue, real ability to be able to build a long-term, scalable, highly profitable business here. And I think that's where, of all the companies in AV, LiDAR, the stuff, we're certainly best positioned for that. But even just in the broader tech market, I think we're one of the best, if maybe even the best positioned company to capitalize on it.
So first of all, I think you said a couple of important things I want to reiterate. First of all, solid position on the balance sheet, a cash burn that's very manageable, and that you're going to continue to probably narrow the cash losses because you're adding customers that are moving into higher volumes of production. And, therefore over time, you can manage the burn. Tom Siebel, that was on a few weeks ago, and, he obviously launched C3 AI, and he was talking about something similar. He's like, look, we have $1 billion on the balance sheet. We're losing, X amount. We could run for 20 years or some number, 10 years, whatever he said, basically without basically making a penny. And I think to your point, it's sort of like, hey, you've got a multi-year runway. You've got serious new customers, commercializing contracts. You're increasing production, increasing partnerships. A lot of good things happening. I had a thesis, by the way, that is not entirely my own thesis, Austin, but you'll probably appreciate this. And that's, we basically went through a period where companies were growing on beta for about the last 2.5 years or so since COVID. Basically, companies grew because everything grew. There was tons of liquidity and everything. I said, you couldn't be a bad investor in about June 2020 to about November of 21. You really had to be almost had to be just off the radar, off the charts, making crazy bets to lose, because almost everything won. Crypto won, growth won, value won. I mean, everything, maybe except oil. It was the only thing you didn't win over that period of time. I said, now we're sort of in a period of alpha where people like yourself, strategic companies have to figure out how to differentiate, how to build better products. We kind of are getting back to the best companies will win. The best companies with the best leadership, the best technology, the best investors. And it sounds to me like, in your case, the best partners and companies that are adopting your technology. And so, I mean, the trajectory looks good. Of course, none of us are tarot card readers, or we're not reading crystal balls, so we don't know what will happen, but it looks good. The indicators are good. Partners like Mercedes, some of the partners you've won in Asia are pumping up volume. And of course, you guys are doing something that I think the market's going to take note of, and that's really addressing not just autonomous driving and assisted driving, but safety and the technology that can enable safer vehicles. And this make me think about the recent at Tesla, they're one of their top AI chiefs, Andrej Karpathy, just left, and that's an really interesting one. You'll hear Pat Moorhead and I talk on our 6.5 podcast a lot about how we think Tesla probably got it wrong by going all in on camera. And that's why they've missed their deadlines on full self-driving. They've missed their deadlines on robo-taxi. This is not an indictment of everything Tesla does. So fanboys and girls out there, do not yell at me. I'm just saying there seems to be multiple layers of technology. And I kind of call it like a trifecta. It's vision, it's radar, and it's Lidar. And Lidar is proven, especially for those more complex environments, to have a bigger safety profile. Why is Polestar working with you? Why is Mercedes working with you? These are companies that are amping up production in their EV and ADAS space, world-renowned companies, and I think they care about being safer. So, talk a little bit about that. Tesla's having some turnover. They've got a disproportionate amount of the safety issues related to ADAS, and is this opening the door for companies like Luminar to make a bigger play here? Is this all expected to you? Kind of what's your take on all this?
Yeah. No, I think at the end of the day, it's funnily enough, some of it is it's interesting to see the way that all these things play out. I can't say that, at least as it relates to me, a lot of it is unexpected. Maybe it's a surprise to a lot of folks out there in terms of how this is all played out, but this is perfectly aligns ultimately with the business plan that we had. And it's the same thing of like, you have all these different macro factors, you have all these other stuff. It's the same kind of conversation. It doesn't actually affect the core of our business. And we're seeing this kind of extreme growth independent of that. It's driven by the OEMs at the end of the day. And that's what's the key driver behind, how you can realize this and make this happen. You obviously have to have the right tech to do this. But this is where, when we see in this case, the substantial majority of the OEMs that are now working with us, to be able to build these kinds of next generation, autonomy and assisted driving, next generation safety systems on the vehicles that ends up making all the difference. And this is where, I think, you take a look at that Tesla case that you're saying there too, and almost kind of infamously tried to make the bet early on in 2015. To be fair, before any of our stuff was we were still in stealth mode. Wasn't a thing, wasn't available to put on cars, where you ended up making a similar system to what Mobileye had. The whole point is what's next, what's the next generation there too. And it doesn't matter what marketing term you call it, full self-driving, robotaxi, all that stuff. None of that is happening. It's not, unfortunately, in the way that things have been currently set up. But the point is, it doesn't need to be. It's not there. Part of the whole point with the company from the beginning is that we made the bet that we were going to be able to go all in for consumer vehicles around next generation safety capabilities and highway autonomy capabilities, is seeing that that's a more constrained problem. And by the way, that's even with this crazy high performance LiDAR that makes it like 100x easier than with cameras. So that's the and of course the equivalent amount of safety increase opportunity of what you would have on a vehicle. So, and that's why you see other things like even in that case, you have one of the longtime leaders of Tesla Autopilot and most recently as well, leading a significant portion of Apple's autonomous team, joined us. CJ Moore, from a software standpoint there, that's driving that whole side forward with Luminar in that case. So I think it just goes to show, we obviously have great partners with the Mobileye of this world and other folks as well that have been all in on camera approaches previously. But again, the question is, what are you trying to do with it? If you're trying to do some basic level 2 system that's, where things are today, you don't need like some advanced LiDAR for. If you want to be able to actually get next generation safety, you want to move towards that the vision of building the uncrashable car, you want to actually enable autonomy and the next gen capabilities, then that's the whole point of where we come in. And the cool part is that, and why we're also so insulated from some of the rest of all the rest of this craziness, is that from a relative market opportunity, I mean, it's not like we're trying to, it's not like we own 100% of an established saturated market here too, that we're trying to squeeze from blood from a stone. It's our whole goal of how we think we can build a just massively valuable business out of this. It requires only 3 to 4% market penetration by 2030, which would already actually be more than covered by just our existing customers alone, much less new ones, as we execute. So, that's the kind of thing that you see that, how you can build. I mean, in this case, it's before, so that's how you build a business with, 5 billion revenue, 2.5 billion EBITDA, and a 60 billion forward-looking order book. And that's just with a very small market penetration. We hope that we can do an order of magnitude more than that. So all those factors taken into account combined, I mean, this is where people are all in on us. They're continuing to go more and more all in on us. And that's where you can see automakers happen able to do that this year. And also part of the part of why I think some of the crazy market dislocations are even more surprising. But nevertheless, we're heads down. We're continuing to execute. We're making stuff happen. We have this great new leadership additions that are making all the difference, like CJ and like Tanner, who previously founded the NVIDIA automotive business and is driving the good chunk of the business there.
Well, maybe you can go back and help Apple with Titan. Seems to be a bit of a mess. So maybe bring in the talent and go back and say, hey, we got some ideas. We can help you guys make this work. So, we saw that with the next generation CarPlay, Apple certainly, digital cockpit. They have I wouldn't say they have an advantage. They have sort of an inherent entrenched user base on the digital cockpit side. That's not really what you're worried about anyway. But I would say on the autonomous and the driving side, first off, you're right about the L2 plus stuff. Although I would argue that there's no real fault in trying to make every vehicle safer. And so whatever technology can be added to make every vehicle safer. And then, of course, as all the companies, including yours, and like you mentioned, Mobileye, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, all these companies that are building for ADAS of the future, more and more this building blocks approach, right? So if you're building cars, you want to be able to, over time, kind of have that upgrade path. You really need to be thinking about, well, maybe now it's L2 plus, but what's it going to need to look like in the future as you try to move into, L4 and beyond? And, how can software and these technologies be a part of that? So I still think there's an opportunity for you guys to influence and participate in a lot of different, vehicles. And of course, the partners that have picked you are also indicating that many of the people that have picked you are picking you into the future. But what I really do believe is even today, companies could be more proactive, could be more focused on safety. We like to fight, in this country about the value of life. And I don't want to get political here, but I'm saying these are real lives that could be saved, so, and they're, so all I'm saying is it's a very odd world. And, you mentioned about all this dislocation, all the forces of the economy and the market. And I love that you said this. And for everybody out there that is kind of listening to this, I mean, we always are, when the market's going up, we have this fundamental belief that it will never go down. I still remember, Austin, all the way into late October, even early November last year, every pundit going on CNBC and being like, buy tech. You can't go wrong buying tech. And then right around November, when it started capitulating, everybody's coming out and saying, buy value. And then value goes all the way up and then into, this cycle where it's gone way beyond what it should be priced. And they're still spouting. And now it's buy oil. And what it's saying is usually, I guess a lot of people do really well when they can sort of see what everyone else doesn't see, kind of that whole, the big short.
When you cut through the noise. Yeah, exactly.
But right now you look at growth and you're like, okay, is Luminar 50%, 80%, whatever it is it really doing less? No, it's grown. It's got more customers, more revenue. It's, you know what I mean? So if you liked it A, you should really like it at B, but people seem to, think every knife is falling, and they think every rocket is going to fly forever, and that's just the stupidity of
Well,
our.
that's what I'm saying is that, like, the point is that on average, there are some instances where certain things can make sense, like certain types of companies that like shouldn't have existed, certain types of things that
features that became companies in a good
they're
market.
ultimately paying the price of what it is. But the reality is that for great companies, like I said, in particularly this like very specific segment of like growth technology, that's more futuristic tech, that's really high tech, stuff that can make a huge difference. Like in this case, it's just all logic is completely out the window. So that's where, as you said, we've never had more conviction in the business and everything that we've had to date as it relates to this, and 100% all in to see this through and make this happen. We will make it. We are and will make it happen. Just as much actually have even more conviction and confidence in everything that we had in not just the base case, but even the aggressive cases, for what we had, about 6 months ago as we do today. So that's why it's kind of weird.
So you just kind of doubled down on my whole grow on beta. There were some companies I said they were features that became publicly traded companies, and those companies are those are chickens coming home to roost right now. They never should have gone public. They weren't really companies. They were like a feature that somebody should have put out under a bigger platform, But that's what I'm saying. Separating, separating the noise from the crowd, and figuring out what the right companies are. So I got a few minutes left with you. One other thing I thought was really interesting is, the East is a really interesting market right now. China's still having COVID lockdowns, but when it comes to your space, it's probably the biggest growth opportunity on the planet. I mean, just the volume of vehicles. And so while we talk a lot about Tesla and Lucid and Rivian here in the States, there is a plethora of vehicle and autonomous vehicle and EV and AV companies. What is Luminar doing there? Is that a market you're concentrating on, and you focus? Is that a growth opportunity? And can you give me a little bit about what you see in China and beyond there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think China is often one of the least understood or underrated critical markets. It's actually the biggest auto market in the world is in China right now. And as you were saying, that I think a lot of certain types of companies don't get the attention. Where you have a company like SAIC, that we're working with. It's bigger than all of the like American automakers and other kinds of equivalents on a scaled basis. But the reality is that very, very few people know about these kinds of companies and the magnitude of what they have. So SAIC, for example, is a lead partner that we have in China that's establishing us and actually going to be really all in to launch with us on a vehicle in the not too distant future, as to really kick off the first series production implementation of this. So obviously we have a lot of different automakers that are lined up internationally here. We've said SAIC, Volvo, Polestar, Mercedes, Nissan, just as a few of them that have gone out recently and publicly have been public with their plans already. But when it comes, among other technology partners like the NVIDIAs and Mobileye and other stuff of this world as well. But the reality is that I think China is unquestionably a massive opportunity that's there in the right areas. There's also a lot of, just as with the stuff in the US, there's a lot of noise in China. There's a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of dead ends. There's a lot of probably the substantial majority of the EV landscape won't exist, X number of years from now, just in terms of those types of companies. But again, it's the best companies that end up actually making all the difference. And that's where you take a look at a very solid established player like SAIC. And that's where we see really a fundamental inflection point in our business as well, is really getting into series production. China is moving very aggressively, very fast. And, we think it can actually be a very good thing as well, because it only reinforces and strengthens the industrialization and really the use case out there, on vehicles by starting in China. And so that's all coming together quite well. And I think there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff not too far around the corner in terms of the inflection point, because the second that you go into series production, on these things, that's what ends up making just a massive difference. That's the fundamental inflection point for the business. And I think also where, same thing for us is that we're kind of no longer that, more R&D focused technology company. And we've been laying all the groundwork for years to ultimately make that difference in the auto market. But this would be the first time that this level of capability is introduced onto a real vehicle, a real consumer vehicle, and one that you can buy. So that's what makes all the difference. And, really excited to be able to get out there with that and break some fundamental new ground for the industry. So, China is a critical. The other thing to support that as well is we have a new head of China, or our first head of China. And we hired, his name is actually Jackie Chen. So yeah, exactly.
I grew up in that era.
Exactly. Yes. In this case, it's a Chen instead of a Chan. But I know, right? But he was previously the president of Harman, China. So they're very established, large scale, tier one, everything there too. So he's just basically building up this office from scratch here, and it's been very very great, successful. The level of and caliber of talent that we're attracting in China is very strong. And we are expecting to grow very substantially in China over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. So this is that's going to be a definitely a key market that is going to be a key drive. And I think it's going to hit folks out of nowhere, maybe as some of this happens and some of this materializes there too, where it's like, wait, what? Because everything's kind of on the down low, the same kind of stuff that people see stuff in China there too, that just doesn't make its way over to the US. So I think that'll be a pleasant surprise, so to say.
Well, it's very exciting progress. You've had a number of big wins. I'm expecting some others, whether it's been Polestar, Mercedes, Volvo, get that same kind of momentum in coming out of China. You got huge volume opportunities. And by the way, very strong interest in adoption and a lot of infrastructure expansion that's going to probably make some of this technology easier to implement, because a lot of the infrastructure is being expanded in real time, where in the US, we can't even pass a bill to manufacture chips, even if it means we don't have any. We're just off the reservation. So I know you have earnings coming up early August. Crossing my fingers, wishing luck. I guess they're, won't ask you much to talk about that because it's never a great question to ask before, but maybe we can talk about that a little bit after, Austin. And then I guess, am I going to see a coda?
I think it's fair to say the whole point in terms of the big picture of what we've been reiterating, like nothing, I think it all reinforces nothing's changed in terms of the big picture about, I think the point is that what we're going to continue to prove time and time again is that we can execute, we can do all this, and all these other crazy macro factors are frankly completely independent of us, and we're actually doubling down, growing, and everything behind it. If we've, substantially increased the fundamental value of the business. That's so.
Well, most of the world's greatest companies grew out of tougher economies. So I know you'll sort of seen a cycle of what would consider a strong.
Yeah, it actually is. There actually is a silver lining to all of this as well, because we're kind of insulated from all of this. Is that what ends up happening, and for the companies that aren't doing well and are really struggling there too, when they need dramatically more capital, they're not meeting the milestones. They're years off and probably never going to meet the milestones for technical feasibility reasons or otherwise. Then what ends up happening is that most of those companies go to the wayside. Most of the companies in the Lidar space and the AV space, for example, will not survive. And it's kind of almost a grim message in that respect. But the reality is that one that's already reflected in the market today. I think most of the companies have an enterprise value of near zero, just the remaining cash they have. But what ends up happening is that that actually just further can end up solidifying the winner take all type approach of this. So as we actually deliver, execute, scale, with this and continue to do so, that ends up being a massive advantage for a continued accelerant there too, from a competitive landscape perspective. So obviously, ultimately, the best tech product, company, business, with commercial wins ends up winning at the end of the day. But I think this just further enhances and accelerates that. So there is a silver lining maybe more than a silver lining.
Well,
maybe, at least as it relates to us.
yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, you're pretty young. I still like to think I'm pretty young, but now I've been through dot bomb, been through the Great Recession, I've been through whatever the heck they're going to decide to call this later on. Worst market in like 70 something years is what they're saying for the start of this year. But at the same time, we're all surviving. And I always say, like, every time you come out of the other end of one of these things, you just get your skin gets a little thicker, your armor, a few less chinks in that armor, a little bit more strength. And overall, like I said, this is technology the world needs. Some people may agree or disagree with Kathy Wood and some of her thesis, but what I will say is there are certain technologies that are deflationary. There are certain technologies that will change the world, and markets at times will not value them. But over the long haul, when you zoom out, those technologies tend to take off. They tend to rip and roar. So maybe it's a hodl.
Yeah, exactly. You have to measure it over a multi-year period. It's like a 5-year period on this.
It's totally 5, 10, and beyond. Everybody remembers when AMD was $1 and Apple went to single dollars, when Amazon what I'm saying is, like, if you thought about it and if you really believe it.
But I think that's actually where it ended up being an advantage. Like, you take a look at like the Amazon case and all these other ones of where,
totally.
After that whole like .com.
Totally. But the people that had the people.
It wipes out everyone else. And then, there's two ways you win at the end of the day. One is by outpacing everyone else in the race and winning. And the other one is being the last man standing. And so
or both.
And we've already been number one, so I think we'll be number 2 as well.
Well, Austin, I really appreciate you coming back on the show. We always love having you here on Making Markets. Wishing you all the best. Excited to see what's coming next from you. We'll have you back real soon. Thanks for joining me today.
All right, thanks, Dan. Great to see you. And awesome stuff there too. I think it was good questions and perspective. So we'll see you around.
Thank you for tuning in to Making Markets. Enjoy what you heard? Please subscribe to get every episode on your favorite podcast platform. You can also watch us on the web at futurumresearch.com/makingmarkets. Until next time, this is Making Markets, your essential show for market news, analysis, and commentary on today's most innovative tech companies.